You could fight for God, for country, for family. I do not care.
I don't even know if today warrants an intro. It's just such a lovely day. Like, I gotta say folks, I cannot say enough how much I really appreciate all the work the New World staff has been putting in. We have 3 months to go before this game goes into beta, but this patch in specific made me feel like I would be just fine with it if they released the game tomorrow. The transformation over time that New World has had, and all the struggles and obstacles, the fear that a lot of us experience with each and every delay and other cancelled games, it's been an absolute roller coaster, and there's still a long way to go. It might never be one of the most popular, or for a long time it might not have nearly as much content, but it's the one that I'm most confident at the moment that I would absolutely call my home. Now with that out of the way, as always, we've got a hell of a lot to cover today, so let's jump right into this. Today's topic is for their PvP vision, and the new features that go along with it. Previously, we were introduced to the 20v20 battleground known as Outpost Rush, and they do give some more detail on that today, along with of course the introduction to the already famous Ice Gauntlet. But among other changes, we also officially have the introduction of the open world PvP based objectives. The fortresses all across Eternum can now be fought for outside of territory wars. Now there is a process to this, but this is exactly the type of open world content that we needed to supplement all the other stuff they've already been adding in. I think the next step, and I totally feel bad for mentioning this again after these amazing changes, but dynamic events. We've got some love on the open world PvP side, but in general there's even more things that can be done to overall enhance the open world experience. Naval mechanics and islands I wouldn't expect for a while if they even want those, but over the next few months I hope we can see some more dynamic events besides the corrupted portals. Now jumping into this, it starts off with them stating that New World focuses on both the PvP aspect and the PvE. So what we'll do is we'll flip between the vision and the patch notes as we go over the changes. It's crucial to them that players can choose how they want to play. Their vision for the game is to have player versus player and player versus environment coexist as one, but also complement each other so players can bounce back and forth between the two. They want unique opportunities and activities for players, and this update will help to make that happen. So let's talk about the big one, the faction control points. So the way this works is that the fortresses have been turned into player versus player hotspots that can be fought over without being in a territory war. To enter the fortresses in general, you now have to be flagged for PvP, and they'll also have their own individual control points, and as factions claim these, there's territory bonuses that come into effect. In this portion of the patch notes, we can see what each one will offer. First, it says they'll provide a 5% increase to experience gain and 20% to influence within that territory. But for the individual ones, controlling First Light gives you a reduced fast travel weight cost of 5 Azoth per 10 weight down to 1 Azoth per 10 weight, which that'll be a big incentive for crafters to whip their factions into winning. Monarch's Bluff reduced the fast travel distance cost from 5 Azoth per 100 meters down to 1 Azoth per 100 meters for the controlling faction. Windsward increased the volume of items gained when gathering by 5% for the controlling faction. For Everfall, reduced the trading tax by 5% for the controlling faction. For Brightwood, reduced the housing tax by 5%, which it's very smart to have a house there because it's the closest zone to Shattered Mountain and Greatcleave. For Cutlass Keys, reduces base Azoth cost by 50% for the controlling faction. Weaver's Fen increases territory standing, experience, coin, and faction token gains by 5%. Really smart to fight for this too, because it's a really good zone to do faction missions in for mid-game. This might even be the most crucial bonus so far. For Restless Shores, same deal, but the bonus pertains to the corrupted portals instead. Morningdale increases the coin and experience rewards and expeditions by 5% for the controlling faction. Now these buffs are global, it's important to keep that in mind, they aren't actually locked to just one zone. Now Ebonscale Reach reduces the refining tax by 5% for the controlling faction, and Reekwater reduces the crafting tax by 5% for that controlling faction. Now the way we get these fortress control points is through this method. Control points get activated 60 minutes after a war or invasion is completed, and then they get deactivated once the war or invasion is declared. And for fighting inside the fort, it's a numbers game. So you capture them by having more players on the point than the other faction, and the forts will remain captured until a different faction either claims them, or somebody wins a territory war for that zone. Plus the game will always send out a region-wide message to let everybody know that another faction is trying to claim it. They also mentioned that in conjunction to this, the previous faction and company bonuses that they told us about would still apply if we controlled the territory. Now, skipping down a little bit, they say that territory ownership is a big part of the New World experience. With the inclusion of territory incentives, their goal is to entice players to take part in claiming and protecting these territories by making the bonuses more appealing. And that's exactly what they're doing with this, but it gets even better. Under the general changes in the patch notes, they expand on the other bonuses that companies that own territory would get too. Firstly though, faction-wise, any two settlements that are controlled by the same faction will have their storage linked, and players can transfer items from another storage to their current location for a coin fee. But when the taxes are delinquent, all company and faction bonuses are disabled, and that'll incentivize more cohesion between the individual companies in a faction, because even though your company may not have the territory, you still get the faction bonuses that come with it. And for the other bonuses, we now officially have a resource card added to each town that provides members of the controlling faction with small amounts of ore, hide, wood, fiber, foods, and oils, alongside refining reagents such as tannin or sandpaper. This would be a really good incentive for crafters, and not only that, that would persuade everybody, even people that just gather, to get involved in either helping or actually fighting for control of these territories. And lastly, they mentioned that the existing benefits we talked about just a second ago, including getting a luck bonus in that controlled territory and a fast travel discount of 70%, which is big. Now, before we jump into the Outpost Rush, I want to flip over for just a second to the patch notes to firstly talk about the Ice Gauntlet, and also the expedition. So with the patch notes being named Icebound, we have the official introduction to the recently teased Ice Magic Gauntlet. Unfortunately, it looks like it's actually tied to intelligence, but intelligence by itself. A lot of people, including myself, had speculated that it would be tied to focus because the previous version was healing based. But like we talked about in the last video, it is an offensive weapon this time, so it being tied to intelligence as a primary does make sense. That being said, I think it would still be great if the life staff had some kind of backup, even if it's another support based weapon, since that definitely seems to be where they want to go with that. For the mastery trees, we have Ice Tempest, which focuses on damage and area denial, more than likely going to be where we see the Blizzard spell, and we have the second tree that focuses on crowd control, protection, and a deployable ice pylon that fights alongside the player, improving their power and efficiency. So I do believe I was wrong on that. It turns out it does fight alongside us. And a very important thing to point out, one of the gifts that they use to showcase this Ice Gauntlet shows an infamous protection spell which is commonly classified as the bane of melee players' existence, the Ice Block. All I gotta say is bring it on. Of course, along with that, we have a new legendary weapon for this known as Rime Lash. The quest for this starts at a ranger in Great Cleave, and actually I'm wondering if this frozen gauntlet that's on the platform will be a part of the quest line, or if that was just for teasing purposes. But either way, the next section we're jumping into is the Lazarus Expedition. So this one is located in Reekwater, so it's probably at least 55 to 60 for sure. We're able to see a couple different screenshot showcases alongside a backstory of this expedition. Players must venture into this secret place that may just hold the key to the origins of the ancient guardians. This is a big piece of info to obtain from a lore standpoint, but it also threw me for a loop because I would have assumed that since Reekwater was primarily controlled by the Lost, that's what the expeditions would be themed after. But in a lot of the pages we went over in the story of the Siren Queen, the ancients in general do play a big part in those. The Siren continually tries to make her followers gather ancient artifacts, and they even experimented with ancient technology. So out of all the expeditions, right now this one is my most anticipated. So two different boss encounters in this one, the first being Scylla, a creature utilizing both lethal weaponry and destructive magics, and Chartis, the colossal ancient construct that stands watch over the Lazarus well, granting eternal power or swift destruction to those who awake him. Which that description alone, this Lazarus well sounds like a fountain of youth. But more than that, this colossal that looks big enough to be an actual world boss is just a construct of the ancients. By the way, there's an Easter egg here that somebody pointed out to me, but for the ancients, that means not only did they have full access to this well, but also they were strong enough and smart enough to build this thing. And we're going to need to talk about this later because you might notice he has one of those gems stuck in his forehead, and it just so happens to be channeling what clearly looks like corrupted energy, which raises some big questions about the ancients overall. And alongside the Lazarus one, Ebonscale Reach has also had an expedition added to it known as the Dynasty Shipyard, and this is where we get a chance to fight the Empress herself. But Isabella for the first time is entering the game in an official way. Isabella's pets, Joven and Oro, are the first boss encounters, which means clearly Isabella is not just in-game, but in-game part 2. I still don't think she's the tippy top dog, but clearly she's about to become a bigger part of the story than we initially anticipated. And also this might confirm that she was in fact the agent that corrupted the Empress, but that timeline gap is still there though. The Empress is from ancient China in this version of history, and Isabella seems to be from the 16th or 17th century time period. So that does add on some questions to a potential backup theory that I was already planning to talk about, or that really could be a plot hole, but we'll have to see. Now the next thing I wanted to talk about is the Outpost Rush. At the tail end of the player vs player vision post, they start by describing the Outpost Rush as a 20v20 battleground where teams must coordinate and balance their time by gathering resources, building up the outpost, capturing objectives, and defeating enemy players. But they say that only level 60 players can jump in solo or as a group up to 5 players, which is awesome that we're getting this mode to add more flair into the PvP, but I think it might be okay to add at least one more mode that you could at least do at lower levels, since sometimes during the mid and even the early game it could be good to take a break from the grind and start up some PvP action. But when it comes to the Outpost Rush, each team will start on their own sides, inside their own fortresses on opposite sides of the map. Between the two forts, we find 3 different outposts: Outpost Luna, Sol, and Astra. Each outpost can be captured by standing inside the control point. We get points for holding the outpost and killing the enemy players. Each outpost grants 1 point every 3 seconds, and each PvP kill grants an additional point on top of that. But that's not the only thing. There are several different things that can contribute to a victory in this battleground. First one is we're able to gather different resources: infused wood, ore, hide, and Azoth itself. This stuff can be used to upgrade our outpost, and each one has a storage where we can compile and share all the resources between everybody on our team. And it's also a good place to store them because these resources do drop when you die in this battleground. And just like the territory war, each outpost will come with an armory where we can spend battle tokens on different things like ammo, potions, items to help in both defense and offense, and strong food buffs. The next part says that once we claim the outpost, we can gather resources to start upgrading stuff like the gates, or even getting a command post to give our team increased damage, armor, and a steady supply of battle tokens. There's also turret placements in the individual outposts like we saw during the developer update, but for the points of interest in the battleground, we have the Baroness, the corrupted portals, and the summoning circles. So firstly with the Baroness, this is a mini boss that spawns every 10 minutes, and any team that gets the killing blow will get a strong buff for the next 3 minutes that increases health regeneration and defense, alongside completely freezing the score for the other team. And the corrupted portals act as something you can deposit Azoth in, and once you deposit about 500, you'll get an item that you can use to summon a powerful ally. And this is where the summoning stones come in, because it looks like you can use these items at the stone to summon a creature to defend the location from enemy players. And since that's everything we have so far about the Outpost Rush, let's go ahead and flip back to the patch notes. First things first, we now have ourselves an official achievement system being implemented into the game. I was not sure in the slightest if they were going to go down this road, but I'm so happy they did. I remember we had conversations in one of my videos over a year ago about how I believe achievements in games can add a sense of purpose, or more enjoyment over time for the players by giving them set objectives and possibly even different rewards over time like titles, or even unique items. We already know that if you participated in any of the alphas, or if you pre-ordered the game, you would receive a title, Expedition 1. So I feel like with that aspect alone, they were kind of telling us from the beginning that achievements were a big possibility at some point. But in the notes it tells us that there are already over 400 different achievements in the game, with more to follow. Players can examine them via the Achievements tab, and the big thing to notice is that they say the achievements have to be obtained with at least one character doing the action all the way through, because the progress is individual, but when you get the achievement, it's account-based. And I think they mean like characters on different servers or different server clusters will have their achievements unlocked, because I don't think they're increasing the 1 character per server cap. But the next thing under general changes, they've added some more voiceover changes to quest givers in the main storyline. And this next one is interesting, because apparently they've completely changed the way that faction missions, both player vs player and player vs environment, would work. The PvP ones now span over contested areas where the enemy faction players will be competing to accomplish their own objectives, and this is almost starting to sound like them stepping into the realm of dynamic events, because this reminds me of PvP based dynamic events you would see in other games, where sometimes you'd even have to secure player kills as part of the quest, or it just automatically flags you when you come to it. And for the PvE ones, they're now multiple step missions across all territories except Shattered Mountain, Great Cleave, and Eden Grove, and are designed to give players a curated tour to locations that fit their selected mission type. My only hope for this is that the rewards for PvE missions have been adjusted, because if you stretch out how long they take, they should have higher bonuses to compensate for that too. PvP missions, on the other hand, have actually been tweaked according to this patch, and now they are more tuned to accurately reflect the risk level and time investment required to complete each specific mission. Then skipping down, we come to the progression changes. They've updated the milestone rewards for leveling throughout the game to start with. We now have tiers being introduced for the Corruption's Bane. So the first one we get can close corrupted portals up to level 25, the second one can close portals up to level 35, and the third tier can close them up to 65. We also unlock different tiers of our camps through the quest lines, and they made some slight changes to when we unlock our houses and consumables. They made some minor changes across the board, but I did want to point out this specific part about armor. So it says that they updated the visuals to all weights of tier 5 armor, but I think they meant types of armor by how the next part is phrased. So now we're able to get even more armor with different visuals, which is always a huge bonus. Some of you might have already noticed through the screenshots that they've been showcasing some of these new types of armor, and they look incredibly good. My favorite so far is hands down this armor right here with the spiked helmet. I would dye all the metal parts red, and then I can pretty much combine this with literally any outfit. For the other cool changes in this part, they also mentioned named items being added to the expeditions, so now each one will have gear of a new variety, and Outpost Rush will also have its own set of gear. To be honest, when we talked about potential PvP solutions a while ago, the honor vendors or PvP specific gear is something I figured wouldn't really be tackled for a long time, but I think people that can enjoy PvP parts of MMOs are really going to appreciate this. They also mentioned that gear perks have had some massive changes, starting with an added variety of new perk items in the drop tables. There's now 150 different perks across all item types, which means builds are going to get incredibly crazy, especially with the new attribute bonuses that we'll be talking about very shortly. Now for one of these important changes, they've added 6 mastery ability perks per weapon. And these are basically perks on your gear that will increase the effectiveness of certain skills, like how during the preview you might have seen ones for increasing the damage on Whirlwind Strike for the sword weapons, or we might see a return on mana gain when using Incinerate from the Fire Staff. The next section deals with crafting and gathering. So expeditions now include exclusive resources in their drop tables, and we're going to use these to craft replicas of the non-crafted named expedition exclusive items. And this will enable crafters to create more powerful items with guaranteed perk outcomes. But the gear score on items is still up to chance. So it might vary, but that also means you can create something much stronger. And don't forget that they did introduce bind on pickup and bind on equip mechanics not too long ago, so that's probably why this change is here. But that's going to be really good for crafters either way, especially because you can trade these via the trading post. And speaking of trading, just to skip down a little bit, trading, like real player trading, has actually become a feature in the game. It allows us to initiate a secure transaction of coin and up to 5 items at a time. Must be within 2 meters of the player, and we can start this process through the social menu or the social actions. For the combat, there's only a few changes here, but they're pretty big. First thing is that characters that use ranged weapons no longer have to worry about being body blocked by other players. You can now shoot through friendly players and hit the enemy. I've seen two sides of this kind of discussion, because on one hand, that added challenge of having to make your shots count gives an interesting dynamic, but on the other hand, it can get pretty annoying when you're trying to help your teammates, but you keep missing for one reason or another. So I think overall that this will probably be an improvement to the combat system, and the next change is for huge enemy staggers. And apparently we're now going to be able to knock certain large enemies into a long, highly punishable reaction by fully depleting their stamina. So I'm picturing this will happen with creatures like the Corrupted Ogre, maybe the Spriggan, big guys like that. And we take out their stamina by delivering heavy attacks or even hard-hitting abilities to whittle down their stamina bar. I don't know what kind of RPG combat this reminds me of, but I'm getting some Dragon's Dogma vibes here. Let me know if this is sounding familiar. I know there's gotta be a few RPGs where we can stun enemies like this by doing enough initial damage. And the last big thing is these attribute bonuses. Now I don't want to go through all of them, but I'll show them on the screen and describe what's going on here. So they describe them as attribute threshold bonuses. They give a persistent bonus to players that maintain certain point values in each of the stats. Now my theory is that they're doing this because they probably looked over time at what kind of builds players would use. For a long time during the previous iterations, even if you used the damage-based character, specifically a warrior, going full constitution builds was still incredibly viable. The strength stat especially was just not utilized how it needed to be. And before they changed focus, neither was that one. But what this does is essentially gives you more of a defined role you can put yourself into. If you want to be a complete strength-based damage dealer, by the looks of this, you can absolutely do that and be rewarded for it. Or even specific gatherers like miners versus hunters would benefit differently from this. Notice that strength has mining speed increases at different stages, and at the end you can even get a passive where you might occasionally mine an entire node in one swing. And then for dexterity, you get bonuses to critical hit, skinning speed, backstab, and headshot damage. You get a chance of ammo returns, and a guaranteed critical hit after dodge rolls, which is going to be crazy for bow users. And you've even got more for focus, intelligence, and constitution. And I gotta say, for a game that does not have defined classes, this is probably going to be one of the most effective ways to promote build diversity between characters. I absolutely love this. And I'm so excited to go full tank with the constitution bonuses I'm noticing. But I also wouldn't feel bad about going hybrid from time to time, depending on how many total points we'll get access to. For the balance changes, there's not nearly as much as we encountered last time, but I did want to focus specifically on the hatchet and the musket changes. The hatchet by itself seems to have yet another attack added to its combo chain. And something I didn't even notice is that apparently this Desperate Refresh passive allowed you to reduce your cooldowns by 20% per hit when you were at low HP. That would have been incredibly strong had it made it to beta, so I'm super glad they caught that early on. And for the musket, I'm noticing these buffs to damage, and I think that's been done because they might be testing out how they can make the musket more viable than it has been. So far I found it to be a pretty decent weapon you can use in territory defense, but I think with this buff, it might be getting much closer to the usefulness of a bow than it was before. And the last thing we'll talk about today under the UI changes is the inventory. And there's also the UI visual updates. Now on the visual updates side, there's nothing too big, but for the inventory, we're now able to lock our favorite items, preventing them from being salvaged. To be honest, this is probably one of my favorite UI changes we've ever seen, because keeping tabs and making sure you don't salvage the wrong thing would have been a nightmare during launch and beyond. But all in all, this is one of my favorite patches. They seem to be going all in, and I can only hope that they continue to listen to the player base and we see some more good additions like this stuff in the future. I feel like they've covered most of the bases, aside from potentially more content needed in the leveling aspect, and of course other cool features they could add, but the only thing I think that might still need some love is the invasion system. Because through all the patches, I don't think we've seen that many upgrades or changes to it. But hey, please let me know what you guys think about this insanely big update. Thank you so much for watching this far, have a wonderful night or day, and farewell.